They told me St. Autelia's was an orphanage, but no one ever left with a family. That's the first thing you need to understand. Children went in, and then they vanished. Beds turned empty overnight. Bowls sat unused at the table. And yet no one asked questions. No one dared. I was 8 years old when the cart left me there. The driver never spoke a word. He didn't even help me down, just let me climb out on my own. And when I turned back, his eyes slid away from mine as if looking too long would curse him. He snapped the reins, and the wheels rattled off down the dirt road. I was alone. The gates loomed above me, black iron teeth biting into a sky the color of slate. Behind them rose the building itself, St. Autelia's. Once a monastery, they said, but its purpose had changed, and standing there, I felt its walls staring back at me, cold and waiting. And then she appeared, the matron, tall, straight-backed, dressed in black so severe it seemed carved from shadow. She said nothing, didn't ask my name. She simply turned, her dress brushing the stones, and began to walk, and I, with no choice, followed her inside. The air smelled of soap and dust. The corridors were lined with mirrors, tall, warped, catching the dim light. I tried not to look, but every glance pulled me in. My reflection seemed smaller than it should have been, as though the glass itself had thinned me. Other children passed us, pale, plain clothes, their eyes downcast, their steps quiet. None of them spoke, none of them smiled. Their silence was heavier than the walls themselves. That night, they led me to the dormitory. 30 beds, iron-framed, lined in perfect rows, blankets thin as paper, pillows flat as boards. Children already lay there, staring upward as though sleep was a command they couldn't obey. I thought of whispering, introducing myself, but something in the air, some unspoken rule, sealed my lips. And then it came, the bell, deep, hollow, final. It rattled the air in my chest. It told us when to wake, when to eat, when to move, when to sleep. It was not a guide, it was a sentence. And as I lay in that narrow bed, the sound still ringing in my bones, I understood the truth. St. Autelia's wasn't a home. It was a place you entered and never truly left. At St. Autelia's, the silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. The matron never raised her voice. She never struck a child. She didn't have to. Her authority was softer, sharper, a blade hidden in velvet. She spoke quietly, and you leaned in to catch her words. In leaning, you surrendered. The first rule I learned was the shoes. At night, every pair had to face the wall, heels aligned in a perfect row beneath the beds. To leave them crooked was to invite her gaze, and her gaze was worse than any punishment. The second was the blanket, folded tight in the morning, corners sharp enough to cut. If she walked the dormitory and found a crease out of place, she would stop at your bed and let the silence hang until you confessed to your own carelessness. You always confessed. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Truth was less important than obedience. Meals were the hardest. Bowls of thin broth. Bread so stale it tore at the roof of your mouth. You ate in rhythm with the child beside you, spoon lifting, chewing, swallowing in perfect time. Speak during meals, and you'd be taken from the hall. Laugh, and you might not return. But the worst of all was the reflection room. A child who broke the rules was sent there. It wasn't a cell, not in the usual sense, just 4 narrow walls, a single wooden chair, and a mirror nailed to the plaster. You were made to sit, to stare, to reflect, the matron called it. Children went in whole. They came out changed, some quieter, Their voices withered down to whispers. Some never spoke again, and some didn't come out at all. We whispered about them at first, where they had gone, why they hadn't returned. But even our whispers seemed to reach her ears. Soon, no one spoke of them at all. Their names faded, their faces blurred, until they were nothing but empty spaces in our memories. I told myself the rules were there for order, for safety. That was what she said, after all. But the longer I lived beneath them, the less I recognized myself. I didn't laugh anymore. I didn't smile. I folded, I chewed, I mirrored. And in the stillness of night, lying in my narrow bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering, was I following her rules, or was she remaking me in her image? The first time a child disappeared, no one asked where she had gone. Her name was Anna. I remember because she whispered prayers after lights out, too soft to anger the matron, but just loud enough to reach me in the next bed. Her voice carried a kind of warmth I hadn't heard since leaving home. She made me feel less alone. And then one morning, her bed was empty. Not messy, not abandoned, perfectly made, corners sharp, blanket pulled tight, pillow smoothed flat, just as the matron demanded. But Anna was gone. The other children didn't look at her bed. They rose in silence, slid their shoes on, and filed toward the dining hall as though nothing had changed. I wanted to ask, where is she? What happened? But the question stopped in my throat. The matron walked between the rows with her usual measured pace. Her eyes didn't linger on the empty bed. She didn't acknowledge it at all. And that somehow was worse than if she had. At breakfast, one bowl remained unused. The bread sat untouched, and still, no one spoke. The silence was thicker that day, pressing against my ears until I thought I'd burst. That night, unable to sleep, I curled my fingers against the wood beneath my bed frame and felt something carved there. I dragged my nails over it, tracing the grooves in the dark until I dared to look. It was her name, Anna, and beneath it, scratched with a hand so desperate the letters splintered the grain, still here. I couldn't breathe. My chest seized as I pulled my hand back, afraid something, would grab it from below. I clutched my blanket tight and tried not to cry. The next day, her name wasn't spoken. By the end of the week, it felt as though Anna had never existed at all. Her absence was swallowed whole by the rules, by the silence, by the matron herself. But I remembered. I still do. And I began to wonder if forgetting was part of the punishment. If the matron's true power wasn't in making children disappear, but in making the rest of us accept it. The first time she made me say it out loud, I understood how children disappeared without a sound. We were assembled in the dining hall, bowls untouched, steam thinning into the cold. The long windows held a colorless sky. All the light seemed to belong to her. The matron stood at the head of the room with her hands clasped, chin lifted, as if listening to a hymn only she could hear. She didn't mention Anna. She never did. Instead, she spoke softly. So softly, we leaned forward to catch it, and in leaning, we yielded. "Order saves," she said. We repeated it, a little ragged. "Chaos devours." We repeated that too, quieter. She paced between the benches, her skirt grazing wood, her scent of lavender and soap settling over us like a second air. "Silence is kindness," she murmured. "Reflection is truth. You are not the children you were. You are Saint Autelia's children, and Saint Autelia's children belong to Saint Autelia." We echoed each line until the words fitted our mouths like a bit fits a horse. When someone stumbled, When a syllable snagged, she paused behind them and waited. The waiting was worse than scolding. It stretched until the child cleared their throat and tried again, until their voice matched the room. Afterwards, she walked the aisles, aligning spoons, correcting elbows, turning a cup so its handle faced east. The smallest errors were invitations for shame. "No haste," she said, still gentle. "No waste. No noise." Each phrase landed inside me like a nail tapped home. That afternoon, she took me to the corridor mirror. Not the reflection room. This was worse because it wore the disguise of ordinary. She stood behind my shoulder, our faces nearly aligned in the warped glass. "What do you see?" she asked. "Myself," I said. "Try again." I looked longer. The glass scooped the light, thinned my features, pared me down to compliance. "A child," I whispered. "A child," she agreed, "who will be saved by order." Her breath warmed the shell of my ear. "Say it. Order saves." Again. I said it until the phrase lost meaning and became a rhythm, like walking in step or chewing in time. When she finally nodded, relief sparked through me so bright it frightened me. I mistook her approval for safety. That evening, a boy at our table laughed, a tiny, helpless burst at nothing at all. The room froze. The matron tilted her head. The boy's hands trembled around his spoon. She merely touched his shoulder and guided him away, whispering something I couldn't hear. His bowl cooled where it sat. We ate in time, without him. Order saves. Chaos devours. Silence is kindness. Reflection is truth. The lines trailed me back to the dormitory like a hymn I hadn't chosen. I aligned my shoes to the wall, heels kissing the skirting, checked the blanket corners twice, then a third time I couldn't justify. By the week's end, I caught myself correcting a younger child's pillow, smoothing it the way she would, and thanking him when he nodded. The thanks slid from my mouth in her voice. That frightened me more than any locked gate. When the next bed turned empty, we didn't ask where its owner had gone. We didn't need to. We already had the words to fill the space, and the words were hers. The beds didn't empty all at once. They learned to disappear the way we did, quietly. First, there was Anna, then a boy from the far row whose name I never caught. Winter came hard. Frost filmed the panes. Our breath made ghosts we pretended not to see. One morning, a blanket lay tight as a drum over a mattress. No one warmed. No one looked. We rose, aligned our shoes, and filed to breakfast. An unused bowl cooled at the end of the table. The matron didn't remove it. She let it sit until the steam died, as if absence had a temperature she could measure. "Order saves," she murmured afterward, her hand gliding over our shoulders like the flat of a blade. We repeated it. We always repeated it. I started counting. Not aloud, never aloud. I tied a knot in the hem of my dress for each child gone. 4 knots, then 6, then 8. The thread puckered the fabric. The matron's eyes found it in a single sweep. She touched the hem, smiled without warmth, and snipped the knots away with a tiny pair of scissors she kept in her sleeve. "No clutter," she said pleasantly, as if tidying a shelf. "No superstition. Only order." The reflection room door clicked oftener that month. A girl named Marta went in for laughing. Small, accidental, a bubble that rose and broke before she could stop it. I watched the matron lay a hand on her shoulder, gentle as blessing, and guide her down the corridor. Hours later, the hallway was still. The mirror inside that room showed only whoever sat before it, unless it showed who the matron wanted you to become. Marta's bed was made perfectly the next morning. I told myself she'd been sent to a family. But the village never had carriages waiting. No new coats, no goodbye. Only silence and a pillow smoothed flat. The matron began to speak of numbers. Order is number, she said. Number is peace. We learned to lift our spoons on the third beat, to place cups down on the fifth. Harmony, she breathed, and our bodies obeyed. When a younger child struggled, I heard my mouth shape her phrases. No haste, no waste, no noise. My voice wore her polish. I hated the sound of it. I needed the sound of it to be safe. I tried to fix the missing with memory. The way a boy hummed when he cleaned his nails, the scar on a girl's jaw, like a pale comma. But memory phrase, where rules, rub it raw. By the end of winter, I could not be sure whether the empty beds were 8 or 10. The number lost its edges, and with it, so did I. One evening, as the light died early and the bell tolled us towards sleep, I reached beneath my frame for Anna's carving. My fingertips found more letters crowding the grain. Initials, scratched hurriedly, overlapping. JLM. The wood felt bruised with names. That night a child across from me kept his eyes open too long. The matron stood in the doorway and simply waited, the lavender of her presence settling like a veil. He blinked. She smiled. In the morning his blanket held its line, tight as a mouth that will not speak. I stopped tying knots. I smoothed my hem. I folded the corners of my blanket until my thumbs ached. If I could be exact enough, I told myself, she would not see me. If I could become the shape she wanted, I might pass through her gaze like air. I was wrong. The last week of winter, I woke before the bell and felt it. The sudden, impossible space where a body had been. Not across the room, beside me. A bed gone still within arm's reach. The skin on my arms prickled as if the cold had hands. We filed to breakfast. An unused bowl waited at the end again. The steam rose, thinned, died. I counted the breaths between hers and mine. I decided then that surviving would mean becoming invisible. Perfect corners, perfect steps, perfect silence. I pressed my shoes to the wall, heels touching the skirting, checked them twice, then a third time I couldn't justify. That was the night I learned perfection is a spotlight. The night before, I vanished. My shoes were missing. I woke before the bell, heart thudding in the silence, and looked down from my bed. The row was perfect, every heel touching the wall, every toe pointed east, except mine. My shoes were gone. In their place was a scrap of paper, folded once, creased by a trembling hand. One word, next. My chest hollowed. The matron didn't need to punish me. She had already chosen me. I dressed slowly, every movement rehearsed. I smoothed my blanket until the fabric burned my palms. I told myself, perfect corners, perfect silence, and she might not see me. But that was the lie we all told ourselves, wasn't it? None of us were invisible, not to her. At breakfast, my bowl sat waiting. Steam curled upward, fragile, vanishing into the cold air. I didn't eat. I couldn't. And when the bell tolled, deeper, louder than I had ever heard it before, I knew it wasn't summoning us to order. It was summoning me. I tell people I left St. Autelia's, but the truth is, I never really did. Years have passed. The gates are gone now, the stone swallowed by weeds. They say the orphanage was shut down, condemned, forgotten. But every morning, I still find my shoes neatly aligned against the wall. I don't remember placing them there. At night, I fold my blanket with corners sharp as knives. The habit burns into my fingers, even when I try to resist. And sometimes, when the house falls quiet, I hear the bell. Low, hollow, final. People ask about the missing children. I shake my head. I say I don't know, but their names are still under my nails, carved into the wood of memory, too deep to scrape away. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection, I don't see myself at all. I see her, the matron, and she is smiling.